Hi, this is Jason, and today I'm going to talk to you about how to work with social media data on volunteer science. This is our third workshop in our summer workshop series. We have a couple of workshops coming up, one on recruiting subjects online, largely volunteers. How do you find the subjects? How do you motivate them? How do you track them through your study? Then we'll talk about cognitive tasks, how to use JS Psych to create reaction time experiments and other kinds of tasks from cognitive psychology. Then we'll talk about multi-person studies, how to create a study where people can talk to one another in real time or share data in real time to do, prisoners' dilemmas or other kinds of group collective decision-making tasks. And lastly, we're going to talk about building your own subject pool. So how do you recruit subjects, get them to give you their contact information, and then follow up with emails and messages about future studies. So today, let's talk about social media data. So the first question is, when do you use volunteer science for social media data? Um, we'll follow that up with 4 specific case studies. We'll talk about showing social media content to users, having participants tag that social media content, or respond to questions based on that social media content, collecting a user's content, so actually grabbing somebody's Twitter feed or Instagram feed, and lastly, having participants then respond to their own posts. So you grab their feed, you show them a post, and you ask them to tag it or respond to questions. So these case studies will build on one another. They'll use the same code in general to create a final version of the study, though there are a lot of little wrinkles on the way. So the first question is, when do you use volunteer science? Now, the best use for volunteer science is when you want to actually link a person's data in the study to their online behavior. So if you want to be able to connect Twitter data to survey data or connect Twitter data to multi-person, prisoner's dilemma kind of data, you can use that with volunteer science. And the reason why you would use volunteer science versus some other platform is, one, we have this app where people can validate that they're going to give you their data and that they validate that they are the owner of that account. So what this does is that if you were doing this in Qualtrics or another survey system and you have like a open text field where you have people putting in, this is my Twitter handle, at volunteerscience.com or at volunteerscience, or my Instagram is volunteersci. You don't have to worry about typos. Typos happen all the time. You don't have to worry about junk responses, so people putting in just random strings or accounts that aren't theirs. And you also don't have to worry about cleaning up the data, so you don't have to worry about whether somebody put the @ symbol or you put in the URL correctly. You get structured data, and I'll show you what that looks like. But in general, volunteer science makes this all easy to use with minimal dirt in your data, as opposed to the typical way that you go about doing this. It also allows you to get permission to use data. So the application that we have is just like any other application on social media platforms. People click the yes, I accept, and then there's a window that opens up that asks permission to use to gather the data. If you use apps on Twitter or Instagram, you've seen that pop up where it says, the volunteer science app is requesting access to your feed, and they say yes. So this allows you to get that explicit permission from users to give access or get access to that data. Lastly, it's good for collecting private data. So if you're doing research on Facebook, where almost all of the data is private, or if you're collecting data on Twitter and you want to include people who have private Twitter feeds, this is the way to go about collecting that data. This is getting permission to collect that data and then actually getting the data itself. There's no other way to get that private data. The one time you would not want to use volunteer science is if you're trying to scrape a lot of data from a lot of users. So if you wanted to get all of the tweets from members of Congress, for example, volunteer science really is not built for that. Just use something like TweetBee in Python to do that. Volunteer science isn't really the best place for that. Okay, so a couple of use cases when you would try to use social media data with volunteer science experiments. One is when you have a survey and you want to see how that predicts different behaviors on different platforms. So there's a narcissism inventory on volunteer science, and say you want to see, do people who are more narcissistic tweet more about themselves on Twitter or post more selfies on Instagram, just as an example. The second sort of category of studies that you can do on volunteer science in a nice seamless way with social media data is looking at in-lab behavior and online behavior. So maybe we want to see, are people who are more generous in the public goods game more likely to like and retweet and support other uh, people online on Twitter, or like other images on Instagram. Uh, Conversely, we can look at online behavior in the lab. So bringing in social media posts or other social media phenomena and have people answer questions about it, or simulate whether they would like it or retweet it, or comment on it. There's a whole lot of simulations that you can do in the lab when you're able to bring in real data. And lastly, you can simulate online systems. So you can construct fake tweets, or you can construct simulated Instagram posts or simulated TikTok videos, or you can hide the name of the person who shared the post, so you can guess, or you can have people respond to the content of the message without knowing who it's coming from, and vice versa. Just a couple of ideas, things that you can do with the volunteer science social media integration. So how does it work? I think of this as working on 3 levels. Level 1 is you're just embedding social media data on volunteer science. Social media data is social. It's meant to be shared, and most platforms have a way for you to embed an individual post on a website, or embed a whole thread of posts on a website, or feed on a website. And all you have to do for volunteer science is just embed that feed or embed that post in one of our experiments. It's very straightforward. Very little advanced technical knowledge needed to make that work. The level 2 access would involve gathering all of this embedded data up front, and then showing it to volunteer science participants in a volunteer science study, sort of one at a time or a couple at a time. So going back to this example of scraping the tweets from members of Congress, you can grab all of those tweets and create a small sample of them, or use the whole sample. Put that up in our consumable system, and then have individuals respond to or rate, or simulate whether they would like or retweet or respond to the post in an experiment. And then we'll show you how to do that as part of this workshop. And lastly, so level 3 access is using the volunteer science application to authenticate and collect data. So this would involve, so volunteer science has applications on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. If there's a social media platform that you want us to have access to, let us know. But what you're doing is you are using that authorized application to request data from a participant, and then using that application to query the social media platform's API to get that data. Again, I'll show you what that looks like and how that works in this workshop. So let's start with example 1, which is just this tier 1, or this level 1 access of embedding social media data in volunteer science. So I have a couple of examples. These are just individual posts on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side is just a link to the study. I'm going to go straight into it. Just so you know, the code for all of these examples is available on GitHub. You can find the links in the comments or in the description below. So let me just go ahead and switch to this. We'll do the TikTok video, because most people don't realize that you can embed TikTok videos. So here's a video that I found ahead of time. There's the share link here, so I can share, copy link, share to Facebook, but there's an embed option. And like I say, most social media platforms have an embed option. And all this does is it gives you, an HTML snippet that you can copy and paste into any website. And as long as it's an valid HTML website, you can render or show this TikTok video. So I copy the code. Same thing with YouTube, same thing with Instagram, same thing with Facebook, same thing with Twitter. You can copy that embed code. Let me show you what that actually ends up looking like on volunteer science. I need to, for whatever reason, when I click these links through Adobe, it asks me to sign in on volunteer science, and it's really annoying. So I'm just going to copy this. So this is my test account that I use for these workshops. This link is not going to work for you. If you want to get these studies working for you locally, all you have to do is go to the GitHub repository, download that the files here, and then upload them into your own account, and they'll work out of the box, as long as the tweets or the YouTube videos are still up. In this case, this is just one file. There's a main.html file, and the first 100 lines or so are these embed codes for the different videos and images. There's a couple of functions, this initialize and a change YouTube function, which I'll go over in a minute. Let me show you what it actually looks like before we get into the code. So I'm going to demo this experiment. So here's the embedded YouTube video. Here's an embedded tweet. Here's the embedded TikTok video that I showed earlier. And here's an Instagram post. So as you can see, these all look like authentic, and they really are. They're authentic, brand consistent versions of these social media posts. And the idea here is that you get it as realistic as possible. So it looks like exactly what people would see on these platforms. It's ecologically valid or externally valid. So let me quit this, and I'll show you how to actually make this happen. Going back into these files. If you remember that TikTok embed code that I had, it started with block quote. This is it. This is exactly what I copied. I went ahead and added some indentations so I can make it a little bit more readable. But that's it. You copy that embed code and you put it into your study. It works. So I have a div here for the show TikTok. I created a div for Instagram, a div for YouTube, and a div for Twitter. That's just to help me organize these things so they're not just anywhere on the page. This is where you would use custom CSS and custom HTML to make it look good. If you remember, the TikTok video was sort of centered already, whereas the YouTube and Twitter and Instagram posts were all left aligned. You'll have to do the work yourself to make it look the way that you want it. But there's a lot of work that goes into that's already gone into making it look good. So I'll show you this Instagram block quote here is actually copied straight from Instagram. When I go to, let me see if I can go to it here and just show you what it looks like. So here's the URL. Okay. Here we go. And here's a post of the cat. If I go to this little 3 dots here, every social media platform hides these things in different places. You'll have to figure that out for each platform that you do. But you go to this embed, and see, it's a tiny little window, but it is literally like 60 lines of code. You can copy the embed code and paste it, and it's just one huge line. Like say, I went ahead and added all of the indentations so that you can actually see it. There's a lot here. Like say, every platform does it differently. So let me point you to 2 things now. One, Twitter has a widget that allows you to just pass the ID for the tweet. Every tweet has a numeric number or numeric ID. And all you have to do is pass that ID, and I'll show you how that works in a second. YouTube, I created a button that just has next video, and it calls the function change YouTube. What I'm about to show you is programmatically how you can load new tweets in line 5 to 8 here, and change the actual content of these social media posts that are embedded in your study. So you don't have to hard code all of this stuff ahead of time necessarily. Instagram, you might. This is pretty complicated to try and customize. But the thing is that in the experiment itself, you can change all of the stuff. Using JavaScript, you can have this say whatever you want it to say. It doesn't have to say a post shared by cats doing things. So let me show you how to customize all of that. So Twitter, on the Twitter side, Twitter has its own custom widget system. We didn't call it twttr.widgets. That's what Twitter calls it. All of this stuff is loaded in Volunteer Science automatically by default. So all you have to do is call twttr.widgets.createTweet, and then pass it the ID. Make sure it's a string, not a number. It took me a couple times to figure out. It should be a string, not a number. So you have to have the quotation marks at the end. And then you pass it the element in the HTML file that you want to attach the tweet to. So this is show_tweet, document.getElementById show tweet. And that's just this thing. As long as you have something where the ID is show tweet, preferably a div, it'll take the tweet that is this ID and plug it into this div. And that's how Twitter works. All you have to do is every time you pass it a new ID and attach it to the div, it'll render the next tweet or a new tweet. And that's going to be the basis of the next example, where I show you how to go take a list of 5 tweets and have a person go through each one and tag each tweet. The other thing I want to show you is changing the YouTube video. So how do you programmatically change any of this content to make it look the way that you want it to look? In this case, I just have a button that's going to shift to a new video. In this case, I have a second video. I already know the embed link. I know the video unique identifier. You see on YouTube here, you do that embedding thing. It gives you an iframe. And the iframe takes you to the YouTube video, and then it has a particular embed link to it. It's not the normal YouTube URL. So all you do is give it a new youtube.com/embed URL with your video identifier, and there you go. So let me go ahead and show you. Oh wait, let me just double check. Yeah, so change YouTube. It has that URL root, and it says to the YouTube iframe, which is defined here. I added this ID equals YouTube iframe. You change the attribute source to this new URL, where you have this URL root plus the URL code. Okay. So let me show you how that works. And these tweets getting loaded. I have this button. I'm going to click it. It's going to change it to a new video. See, new video updated. So this is just showing you programmatically how you can change the content in these social media posts. All right, so that is the core of rendering a social media post in Volunteer Science in a nice, professional, official, externally valid looking way. So this could be the fundamental approach for adding in and showing all of the social media posts. And we're going to focus on Twitter because it's the easiest to deal with moving forward. So example 2, tagging social media posts. So we have a bunch of tweets already that we've collected, and we're just going to embed these in a study and have somebody answer a survey. So the way you do this is, ahead of time, you gather social media links, again, scraping all of them or getting all the tweets from members of Congress. You can use the URLs or just the tweet IDs, however you want to process them. Upload those URLs, links into the consumable system, which I'll show you. And then you can use the consumable system to dole them out randomly. So you say you have 1,000 tweets from members of Congress. The consumable system will allow you to pull 1 or 2 or 10 at a time, depending on how you want to build your study, at random. And pull them at random, and then show those 1, 2, 10 tweets to a user. And so the reason why the other advantage to using the consumable system is not only the randomization, but the rebalancing. So if you have a truly random system, some tweets are going to get seen and tagged 10 times or 20 times, and some are going to get tagged only 3 or 4 times. So the consumable system not only randomizes the system, but also rebalances so that if a tweet gets tagged 5 times while everything else has been tagged twice, it's going to downweight that tweet, so it gets seen less. Whereas a tweet that's been only tagged twice will get upweighted, so it's more likely to be seen by the next person who comes into the study. So let me show you what that all looks like. Again, I'm going to switch over. These links aren't working. The study code, again, it's available at GitHub and linked in the description. So let me just show you the consumable system. I'm going to start here. Let me just go back. So this is my team. There's a tab called Manage Consumables. Tweet Demo is the class that I've created. When you go to actually create your own set of consumables, you want to type in a name here and create a new class. That'll create a set. And then you'll just paste in whatever data you want here. Paste your data in and click Save, and there you go. So in this case, I have 5 tweets. These are all from the White House, so I feel safe that they're probably not going to get deleted. I have them pasted here. Once I have them added, I can create a set. Let's say we'll call it set 1. Click this so they're all selected, and we click the new set button. What this does is it allows you to test out your sample on test out your tweets on a small subsample of tweets, the consumables experiment, and then you can create a second set. So that, as I said, if we prevent tweets from getting tagged too much or too little. And so if you want to sort of reset it so that everything has been tagged 0 times, or you want to count it as being tagged 0 times, you just create a new set. Anyway, that's more detail than you need. There's a whole training on this on our YouTube page. Just look for actually this particular experiment, and you'll find it. Okay, so let's go to the code here. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull in those URL or those tweet IDs, and we're just going to show them to users and have them fill out a survey. So tweet.js is deactivated, but it still shows up. Ignore that. Survey.js is the survey. I'm not going to go into it because this is not a workshop on creating surveys. It's not even the best version of a survey maker on Volunteer Science. It's just created for this particular purpose. Feel free to look at it if you want, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. The HTML page, like just the main HTML interface, is very simple, 15 lines of code. The first line is the instructions, telling people what to do. And then there's sort of this main box, 3 to 15, where there's the interface. On the left-hand side, there's going to be a consumable box where the tweets live. It's called tweet boxes, where the tweets are actually going to show up. And then on the right side, there's going to be a survey container with the survey box and a survey. You can ignore those details. And then there's going to be a button, the submit button. And the submit button calls this function save data. And what the save data function does is saves the data from the survey and then gets a new survey. Again, I'm really going to wave my hands about this because this is not the point of this particular workshop. But just know that that's the way that it works, because I will show you I'm not going to talk about it, so I'll keep it at 50,000 feet. Okay, so this is a demo. And I'll show you after this demo how we actually make this work. So here's my instructions. For each tweet, answer 3 questions. There's a 4th question now. When you submit your answers, you'll see a new tweet. The left-hand side, oops, it's a link to the thing. So you see this tweet from the White House about the American Rescue Plan back in January or March. I guess here's a set of questions that I can answer about it. So what emotion does this make me feel? Or does this tweet elicit? I'll say it's officially been passed. Hopeful. All right. What's being communicated? Certainty. Sure. If I saw this in my timeline, how likely would it be to like the tweet? Somewhat likely. Other thoughts? Yay, money. Whatever. And this is just a text box. I submit, that data gets saved with the ID of the tweet, so I know which tweet was responded to, and I'll show you again what that looks like. And then I get a new tweet to respond to. And I can keep going until I run out of tweets, or you as the researcher says, I only want you to do 5 tweets, so once I do 5, I can end the experiment. But let me show you what the tweet handling system looks like. It's in consume.js. So when the study loads, it calls the initialize function. That's a standard volunteer science function that you define. All of the documents load, and then we call the initialize function, and you just have to define what initialize actually does, if anything. So we get the tweet, and we then get the survey. So let me just show you what the get tweet function is. That's really the heart of this here. So get tweet, the first thing it does is it empties out that tweet box. We recall get tweet every time we hit that submit button. So, if it's not the first time that we are loading a tweet, we'll want to empty out that tweet box div, this thing here. And I could call this whatever I want, tbox, tweets, Twitter side, whatever, as long as it's consistent. As long as this says tweet box, as long as this says tweet box, you're good. So the first thing I want to do is I'm empty out the tweet box, and then I'm going to call get consumables. I'm going to use tweet demo sat1, and this is pulling in those tweets, the tweet IDs, and this says 1, which means I'm just pulling 1 at a time. It comes back as a variable called data. I grab that 0th object because it's expecting an array. So if I said 2 or 10 or 20 tweets, it would be an array of those 20 tweets. Since it's 1, it's still an array. It's just an array with 1 thing in it. So let's save it as, pull it out as data 0. I called it consumed just because that's sort of the name that we were already using. I could call it tweet or Twitter ID or whatever. But it is that long numeric string. And I pass that numeric string from the consumables list to the show tweet function, which is defined down here. And it's the same function as before. So I say show tweet TID. Again, this is passing a parameter now. So I say twitter.widgets.create tweet. There's that TID, and then I attach it to tweetbox. And that's it. That's all you have to do. You say empty out the box. So if there is a tweet already there, we'll remove it, get it from the consumables, and then pass the Twitter ID to the show tweet function. If you want to count a consumable as actually having been consumed, there's this function here. So you actually count it. Remember I said if it's actually been rated 10 times, this is how you tell the volunteer science system that it has been rated. You say set consumables, give it that class name, tweet demo, the set name, set1, and then consumed. Again, I called it consumed up here. So as long as those are consistent, but you can name it however you want. So that's it. That's the magic. As you see, this is the save data function. When you click that submit button, saves the survey, sets the consumable, and then gets the next tweet. All right, I'm not gonna save the thing there. All right, so that's how you make that work. Example number 3, collecting a user's tweets. So the way this works is volunteer science, we have those apps that are registered with the social media platforms that I mentioned earlier. You're going to create a study that uses our API to make a request through that app. And I'll show you what the Twitter API call is. I think it's actually Twitter API call. But there's a specific function that you use to make a request. And once the user or the participant accepts the permissions, then you can make requests to the API endpoints that you have permission for. Then that the user has permission for. On Twitter, most people have access to most endpoints, but when you're doing something on Facebook and every endpoint is private and you have to authenticate and get permission for every endpoint, this is going to be really relevant. You have to pass the endpoints that you're asking for permission for, whether it's the photos or posts or friends list, which you can still get. You have to specifically request it, and then you can only call the ones that you get the access for. So let me show you how that works. Again, there's the code. The code's available on GitHub, and the link is in the description. I'm going to copy this, and we're going to go over here. Again, this is my team. All you need to do is copy the GitHub code into your own as your own experiment, and it'll work. So let me actually just show you. Oh, this one actually doesn't look very good. Because I'm just grabbing the data. I don't actually show it. So I'm going to do Control-Shift-J, and that's going to open up the console, so I can see what's actually going on in the background of this website. I'm going to click Get Twitter Data. Usually, the box opens up and it says Volunteer Science is requesting access, but I've already given access, tens of 20 times in creating this demonstration. So it pops up the box and says, oh, we already have access to it, and so it moves on. All right, so in this case, you can see in the console, I was scraping all of my personal tweets from Twitter. And I know already that it's called tweets. I created it in the study, and I'll show you what that looks like. So tweet 0 is my most recent tweet. Tweets 1 is the second to most recent tweet. And you see, like, my most recent 3,200 tweets are now in this tweets object. Let me show you how that works. There's a lot that you can do with that. I'm not going to show you how to do anything with it right now. That's sort of the next example. But this is really going to show you how you actually scrape somebody's entire Twitter feed after this request. So there's just one file. It only takes 79 lines of code to make this work. Commenting accounts for 10% of that. So there's just 9 lines of HTML. Actually, this is not even working correcttly. I think it's probably not being shown. The 7 lines here are just, first, may we access your tweets, that little message at the top. And then there's this div here that is the button. Generally, what I would say is just copy this button. Don't worry about changing anything or editing it. The easiest thing to do is to just copy this little line of code to create the button. But if you want to create your own, just know that the href is /Twitter/request token. So if you're on Volunteer Science in a Volunteer Science experiment and you make a ping to Twitter request token, that's what pops up, that window where you're asking people for access to their Twitter data. So when you click Get Twitter Data, it calls this function here. So make Twitter button assigns a function to request token, which is this div here. I'm not going to go into it too much for 1 second because I want to finish the big summary. But it calls this make Twitter function, which basically calls this function. And this function is the function that actually goes through your Twitter timeline and gets 200 or however many tweets you want at a time. And it scrapes it until it reaches the end. Sub1 is just a utility function to make sure that you're able to get the next ID. So if you are familiar at all with scraping Twitter feeds, you have to tell it what the next ID is when you do every iteration of the search. So you get 200 and then you say, I want 200 starting after this next ID number. Again, I'm not going to teach you how to scrape Twitter here today, but just know that that's what that function is about, and that's the last time I'm going to mention it. So let me show you how this works. So we have this make Twitter button. I would just copy this code, and if you were actually scraping somebody's Twitter feed. If you want access to different endpoints, I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But you say make Twitter button, and what this is doing is it's creating a function that basically just says, hey, call read Twitter timeline. And what that does is it's going to go through and scrape everybody's tweets or scrape the person's tweets. And all you're doing here is adding the tweets that come out of read Twitter timeline to a variable called tweets, which I've defined up here. And we're setting this value to 200 because down here, read Twitter timeline takes the argument count. It was the number of tweets you want to collect. Or no, so count is the number of tweets you want to get for every API call that you make. Max tweets is the number of tweets that you want in total. And right now that's left at 0, and I think the default is the 3,200 tweets, the maximum you can get. So that's what this is doing. It's just saying call read Twitter timeline where you get everybody's tweets or get all of somebody's tweets and give me 200 at a time. This is the magic. Line 32 to 62, read Twitter timeline. This is not the function call for accessing Twitter. This is just the function for actually going through somebody's entire Twitter timeline. So you say read Twitter timeline. I'll talk about this in 1 second. This is the actual Twitter API call. This is the real magic. But just to mention here, if for whatever reason you don't have a max ID, it's just going to call it once. It's a very rare circumstance, but it happens. So what happens here is this is where you create your params. So if you're going to do anything that's not the user timeline, or you want to have a whole bunch of parameters that you're searching for, you want to exclude retweets, or you want to let's see. What else is there if you want to filter on time of day or specific hashtags, things like that. The way that you create those kinds of search parameters is you have this variable named params, and you pass it as a dictionary. So where the key is the field name, and then you have the value as the value. And then for Twitter API call, the way this was constructed is you have your Twitter API endpoint. So if you go to the Twitter API documentation, you'll see the endpoints that you generally have access to, and you'll see the kinds of parameters that you can pass to it. So all you have to do is put in the endpoint that you're trying to query and the parameters. And then the rest of it is what do you do with the data that you get back. So Twitter will tell you what data you get back. All this is doing is just save the huge JSON block of data that comes back from when you query statuses user timeline for somebody with the parameters 200 and a max ID of nothing. And this is just taking that data and saying, if we've reached the max number of tweets, then we stop. If we haven't reached the max number of tweets, then we do it again. So it's a recursive function like that. And that's it. So what happens, stepping back, we have this button that calls the Volunteer Science app authenticator. And when you do that, this make Twitter button, once they accept, it runs this function, which is reading Twitter timeline, where we are asking for 200 tweets, and we're sending them to this tweets variable, or asking for everybody's tweets 200 at a time, and saying it to these tweets variable. And these two functions you'll see in the next one are just scraping everybody's tweets up to 3,200. So that's that. That's how you get users' Twitter data. If you wanted to save it, let me just go back here a second. Then once this is done, you would then call submit tweets, and you're done. Submit is our function for saving things, and this is basically just going to save this huge JSON block for this particular user. I encourage you to clean the data ahead of time, just so you're not saving a ton of data, because then it takes a lot of time for it to export. But you don't have to. It takes time to export the data if you save it. Save big chunks of data like this. Quit it. Okay, last example. Tagging your own posts. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of combine everything that we've learned up to this point. We're going to request a user's posts. We're going to request access to them. We're going to download those posts. We're going to show each post one at a time and have the person fill out a survey about each post. We're going to save the data from each survey with the Twitter ID or the tweet ID, so we know what survey fits with what tweet. And then we're going to load the next post. Again, this is available on GitHub and linked in the description. I'm going to open it up here in my test account. And I'll show you what this looks like. So same thing here, maybe access your tweets. Yes. All right, so start tagging. Here's my most recent one. I retweeted a sociology article, or an announcement of a sociology article. If you'll notice, this is a retweet. If you want to filter this for actual tweets, the person created themselves, you'll have to do some pre-screening ahead of that. You can either do that at the API call, or you can do it once you have the data. It's better to get it at the API call, so you're not having to sift through tons of data, or wait for tons of data to download. But it's up to you. So I have my most recent tweet. What emotions does this tweet elicit? I'm excited. I'm excited to read this paper. What's the emotion communicated by the tweet? So don't miss. We're gonna say energized. Don't miss sounds kind of energized. If I saw this tweet, how likely would it be to like it? Well, obviously it's my tweet, so very likely. Other thoughts? I can't wait to read this one. All right, submit, and I get the next tweet. I can keep going and keep going and keep going. As you'll see, it's also very familiar, right? We just did this 2 examples ago, where we had the survey on the right and tweets on the left. Except this time, rather than using the consumable system, we're getting it live, and we're getting it from a specific user. So again, we can ignore twitter.js. It just has all of this stuff, but commented out. I decided to keep it within the HTML file. And this Twitter.js is not in the GitHub, so you're not missing anything. Survey.js, you'll recognize this is the survey that I didn't talk about. Again, this is not a workshop on creating surveys in JavaScript. So let me show you where the magic happens. So you may recognize this. This is the request. May we access your tweets? It's the exact same as the study before. The only thing that I've added is this button to start tagging. And the reason I add the button is because I don't want people to try to start tagging as soon as they click that Get Twitter Data button, because there's a delay. And so sometimes if you're quick enough, you can try to load a tweet before there's any Twitter data and cause an error. This study will try to grab tweets that don't exist yet. So the Get Twitter Data button, once it's clicked, will then show this, and I'll show you how that is engineered. but that provides that little bit of latency to make sure that there are tweets to be tagged before somebody actually starts to tag them. This you'll also recognize, hopefully, as from example 2. There's Twitter box on the left-hand side, and there's the survey container on the right-hand side with next tweet as the function. And lastly, you'll notice the show tweet. Same function for rendering a tweet or embedding a tweet in the website. Same function for reading the Twitter timeline and sub 1. None of that has changed. The only thing that's different is first this make Twitter button. Don't need to indent that like that. So make Twitter button. Again, everything is the same except I'm adding to the tweets, but then I'm going to show that ready button. So once I scrape the tweets, I'm going to show the ready button, which is this thing. See, right now it's display none, so I'll show it once I click the button. And then I'm going to do query for 50, and I'm going to take 20. So I make a call for 50, and I save the first 20. The other new thing is this new tweet or next tweet function. So this is the function that I use to show the first tweet and every tweet after that. This is sort of controlling how I show the tweets to people and what tweet is up next. So every time I click this, I'm going to empty out the tweet box. Again, if it's the first time, there's nothing there, so it's not really doing anything. But if it's the second or third or fourth time, it's emptying out the tweet that they just rated. The first condition here is if next tweet is 0. So I'm using this next tweet variable that I've defined up here and started it with 0 as a way of keeping track of which tweet am I on. So if it's the 0th tweet, the first tweet in the list, I haven't done one yet, I'm going to hide that request button, or the request div here. So if it's the first time that I call next tweet, I'm going to hide the request and hide the start tagging button. And I'm going to show the tagger. Now I say tagger.css display flex because when you do .show, it shows it as a display block. And so that means everything actually ends up being end up being stacked, one on top of the other. So display flex is how I keep them side by side. But anyway, I show the tagger. Config survey, I haven't talked about it because it was it's part of the survey, but basically it just gives you an empty survey. Next, I actually pull out that first tweet. So I remember I saved all of the tweets in this variable called tweets. And remember, next tweet is 0, so I'm grabbing the 0th tweet or the first tweet in the list. So this is actually the whole JSON block for that first tweet, and all I'm going to do is pass it is pull out the ID string tweet.id underscore string and pass it to show tweet. So when you get a JSON block from Twitter in JavaScript, you'll have this key value pair where you have a list of keys with some variable or values attached to them. And the way that you can access them in JavaScript is calling the variable dot and then the name of the variable of the key. Or you can also do ID underscore string with the square brackets. That also works. But tweet.id string, I pass the ID string to the show tweet function like we've been doing for the past 2 examples now. And then I increment next tweet. So the next time I press the button, next tweet is going to be 1 instead of 0. Now, in that case, when next tweet is not 0 anymore, but if next tweet is less than the length of tweets, which means that I haven't gotten to the full list of tweets yet. The first thing I'm going to do after emptying the tweet box is saving the survey. So I save the data, give out a new survey. Again, I pull out the next tweet, and again I send the ID string to show tweet, and I then increment next tweet. So after doing the first one, I clear out the tweet box, I clear out the survey, and then I get the next tweet and show it. That continues on until next tweet is longer than the number for next tweet is bigger than the number or equal to the number of tweets that I have, in which case I've gone through all the tweets and I'll call experiment complete. It's not a nice way to end the study. Just just calling experiment complete. It's usually better to say thank you, or give people some feedback on you correctly rated 5 out of 6 or whatever tweets. But experiment complete is how you actually end the study. And again, for those of you who are wondering where the save function is, it's in save survey, which is over here. And that's that submit function here. Again, it's in the survey, so I haven't talked about it. But what it starts off with is it first saves the ID string for the tweet, so we know which tweet is being saved. Then it figures out what kinds of questions were asked, and so it pulls out the data from those questions and then just submits it. And when it's done submitting, we run the config survey, which clears out the survey and gives us a new empty one. So that's it. That's how you pull in tweets from an individual, have them tag them, save the data as they go. Oops, I should go ahead and show you what that data looks like. Whenever you're collecting data for an experiment, you just go to the Export Data tab. And down here, you'll be able to see, here's the Twitter ID that I was saving. And then I was excited, energized, very likely to like it. I can't wait to read this article. So there you go. If you have any questions, there we go. If you have any questions, let me know. You can reach me at jason_radford@volunteerscience.com or reach the broader volunteer science folks at support@volunteerscience.com. Please sign up for our upcoming workshops. We have some previous recordings of the first 3 on YouTube. Hopefully you see those. And the remaining ones will eventually publish up on YouTube. You can register for them at volunteerscience.com/events. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.